In 2009, a video was uploaded to YouTube with the name Cave Game Tech Test by Notch. This video is no longer accessible, but archive versions exist, like this one from Internet Video Archive, where we can see the original upload's description. This is a very early test of an Infiniminer clone I'm working on. It will have more resource management and materials if I ever get around to finishing it. This Infiniminer clone would go on to become Minecraft, a game with over 238 million copies sold, which is often cited as one of the greatest video games of all time, and is literally the most sold game of all time. But what about the game it cloned, Infiniminer? Where did this title come from, and what became of it? Well, Infiniminer was made by the studio Zachtronics, a brilliant studio with a strong catalog of games under their belt, who, as of 2022, is closing their doors. Hi, I'm Cinerin, and today we're talking about Zachtronics, a game studio always ahead of its time.
From humble beginnings.
Zachtronics is named for its founder Zach Barth, who reminds me of a wise hermit type. With self-titled Google talks such as Zachtronics 10 Years of Terrible Games, or the company's official Twitter bio, which reads, "In the pursuit of clandestine R&D objectives, Zachtronics accidentally releases games from time to time." You can hopefully see what I mean about the character of this company and its founder. Zachtronics' history includes many little projects that are worth thumbing through on your own, but the first notable titles released by Zachtronics are part of the Infini franchise. From Infinitron through Infiniminer, these rudimentary titles debuted online on what is now dubbed the site formerly known as Zachtronics.com over the course of the years 2008 and 2009, and all exist as a somewhat evolution of each other. Infinitron was a tactical board game in which players create the board, the units, and even the rules as they play the game. If that sounds abstract and difficult, it's because it is. As Zach himself writes, while Infinitron is somewhat playable, the rules aren't necessarily balanced or that fun. I've played one game of Infinitron with 2 friends. It lasted 8 hours, and I'm pretty sure everyone was unhappy by the end. But that doesn't mean you won't necessarily enjoy it. A key part of the Infini franchise is the infinity part. Zachtronics believes in and encourages infinite expression for the players, almost like the structure of D&D, but applied to any game. So even in their earliest form, we can see how the studio would go on to heavily inspire one of the most sandbox games of all time. From Infinitron came Infinarena, a free code version of Infinitron that was kind of too buggy. Then from those two came Infinifrag, a networked multiplayer FPS that was kind of like Team Fortress 2 in terms of your goals, but also with base building. Putting all of these concepts together, Zachtronics released Infiniminer in April of 2009, the most playable form of the Infini franchise up to this point, and as Zach would later describe it in an AMA, the game that started the block game genre without making any money whatsoever. The title was similar to the Team Fortress aspects of Infinifrag, but upped the building aspects as well, resulting in a game where you played on 2 teams with 4 classes to be chosen from. From there, your objective was to mine for materials and bring them to the surface to net points for your team. However, early on, many players found that building was much more fun than competing for points and would opt for that instead. Infiniminer quickly garnered a lot of attention, but trouble was around the corner. Less than a month after Infiniminer's release, a major source leak was discovered due to the developers forgetting to obfuscate a new release, which allowed players to make unauthorized modifications to the game. Zach tried to take this in stride, accepting the blown open game, but people began modding the heck out of this game, both to be loser cheaters or to just change the game into a different version that was deemed better by enough players. After a certain point, there were too many versions of Infiniminer and too much dissent. The game wasn't really within the grasp of Zachtronics anymore, so they ceased development on the title within months. Around the same time the source code was made open, Notch found his inspiration, admiring the building aspects but feeling that changes needed to be made. 2 years later, we got Minecraft, while Zachtronics just got a headache. But not all was lost. Around the same time that Minecraft was released, Zachtronics would put out their first commercial game, with a small team assembled too. This game was Space Chem, as Zach describes it, a programming game about fake chemistry that somehow made enough money to fund a game studio. Space Chem is a neat but rather challenging game that's about constructing factories to arrange materials into chemical products at the molecular level. The tutorial and learning curve at the start are a bit rough, but once you're beyond that, you can create some pretty eloquent solutions, or you can abuse the open-endedness of the game to create Turing-complete brainfuck interpreters if you're really crazy. Space Chem immediately garnered widespread attention and admiration, even being noted by the Infini franchise's main inspiration, Team Fortress's creator Robin Walker, is pretty much the greatest game ever made. The game was also included in a humble bundle game pack in its release, so while we don't know the total number of copies sold, we do know that nearly 250,000 units were sold through the bundle. So, Space Chem was a huge studio solidifying success. However, it's also the first title that came to define Zachtronics games, specifically,
R2, act like game.
With the release of Space Chem came the beginnings of the Zachtronics Renaissance, and also the emergence of the Zach-like game. While it's hard to say what is and isn't a Zach-like game across the Zachtronics library, I'd say the most Zach-like titles are these, with the undeniable Ultra Zach-likes of the studio being these. I'll recap the Ultra Zach-likes in a moment, but first, let's answer the question, what is a Zach-like? A Sinner-Defined Zach-like is an open-ended, highly optimizable, problem-solving game with a setting of usually chemistry or programming that's also often fairly challenging. It's natural to refer to these games as puzzle games, but Zach fans like to make a distinction between puzzle games and problem-solving games, where problem-solving games are seen as having even more solutions to each puzzle than the latter. Key trait number 2 is those themes. In science, physics, math, computer science, chemistry, genetics, whatever, we're usually modeling our world by thinking about the smaller finite components that have built it up. In chemistry, we learn that materials are created by combinations of elements of the periodic table, which build into molecules. Every DNA sequence that encodes how every creature on Earth is created starts from combining just 4 nucleotides. In computer science, we learn that any program can be built out of a small list of instructions. In a Zach-like, you're given the finite components and you're asked to design the world. So now that we have a working idea of the Zach-like, let's cover the main hits. Following Space Chem, it'd be a couple of years before the next big Zachtronics breakthrough hit, but come 2015, Zach came back with Infinifactory. Infinifactory, the true end of the Infini franchise, is another block-type game that expands on the factory designing aspect of Space Chem, instead making that the focus of the entire game. As Zach puts it, Infinifactory plays like a version of Space Chem that wasn't written by an asshole. Infinifactory has this really great story building because it's got a lot of show-don't-tell moments that are reminiscent of a game like Inside. In Infinifactory, you're building stuff for aliens, and of course you're assuming you're working for the right people and doing the right things. However, as the game continues, you'll see these little moments and develop systems that really make you question the ethics of your bosses. Just months after Infinifactory, the next Zach-like sensation emerged, TIS-100, quote, the assembly language programming game you never asked for. In TIS-100, your task is to rewrite corrupted assembly code segments to repair the tessellated intelligence system 100 to unlock its secrets. This title is the first Zachtronics official release, which also encourages you to print out a manual with spooky little highlights and annotations in order to fully understand your task at hand. TIS-100 also includes a sandbox mode, which people have used once again to create all kinds of Turing-complete excellence. Following TIS-100 would be what I consider the Zachtronics magnum opus, not to be confused with their opus magnum, and the title that exposed me to Zachtronics at all. 2016's Shenzhen I/O. In Shenzhen I/O, you're using assembly language to program Arduinos. That may be a dry opener to some, but that's only because you have yet to see this. Like TIS-100, you're encouraged to once again print out a manual. However, the Shenzhen I/O manual is much more expansive and is truly a fascinating thing to flip through. In the game, you're working for a technology manufacturer in Shenzhen, China. So of course in your manual, you're given all sorts of neat immersion-building documents, from your job offer to your immigration form, along with technology documentation in fluent Chinese. It's so incredibly charming that you know a great game awaits here. Once you start the game, you immediately begin receiving emails from your charming coworkers. For people like me that need simulated human contact in my daily atypical life, this is incredible, but for your average office worker, I can understand any hesitation. But all you have to do is work on the projects you're assigned. Imagine a job with no meetings, where you don't really have to respond to emails and everyone you work with has their charm. That's kinda cool. Anyways, the projects you work on in Shenzhen range all over the place, from your first project of designing a fake security camera, which isn't the most entertaining, to making light-up vape pins for a musician named Cool Dad to hand out at his dubstep concerts. You also at a point get to review your coworker's daughter's solitaire game, which introduces the solitaire minigame feature that many future Zachtronics titles will expand upon, just because people in the Zachtronics studio enjoyed that game. Ultimately, Shenzhen I/O is incredibly charming and personable, and is clearly my favorite of the Zachtronics titles. As an aside, it may be worth it to mention that sometime between TIS-100 and Shenzhen I/O, Zachtronics was sold to Alliance Media Holdings, who managed the publishing, marketing, and taxes side of the business, allowing Zach and his team to really focus on great game development, and that shows. The final Ultra Zach-like to discuss here is Opus Magnum, a game about using nanotechnology to create alchemical solutions. Opus Magnum is the most abstract in its theme of alchemy, however, it treats the subject as fact and science, making it fit in with all the previous Zach-like titles. This title improves on many features of past Zachtronics games, giving you an infinite workspace for your solutions and allowing you to run your solutions infinitely with maximum satisfaction. Opus Magnum has an amazingly cohesive theme, and is perhaps the most accessible and completable of the Zach-like titles. There's a story that ties well into the problems that you're solving, and it feels nice to see how Zachtronics has evolved over time in their ability to tell a good tale in the context of their games. After Opus Magnum, we'd see a few more releases from Zachtronics through to their final title. Exapunks and Molex Synthes are other debatably Ultra Zach-likes, but I find these to be similar to previous titles we just discussed. Then you'd get 2020's iconic Morbius Front 83, maybe a Zach-like, which just like the real Morbius, was a colossal hit! I'm sorry, this game did absolutely nothing to deserve that. In 2019, Zachtronics would dive into the education sector, launching Zachademics, which allowed educational and nonprofit institutions to freely download and play the most educational Zachtronics titles. There were also 3 secret Zachtronics games developed around this time, which were educational apps that looked very well designed, though I can find little to no further information on them, as it seems things direct to this educational company which may or may not still license out the titles to educators. In the later years, the studio would experiment and jump around genres a lot, like the AI counseling-themed visual novel Eliza, the competitive solitaire game Nerds, and finally Last Call BBS, which is really more like a Zach light. Last Call BBS released this past June and is technically the final Zachtronics project. There's going to be a final solitaire collection dropping at the very end of the year, which is very Zachtronics-like, but Last Call BBS seems to be the final farewell. Last Call is a collection of little activities. Games might not be the right word for a lot of them. You can fake pirate old Zachtronics titles, play solitaire, build a Gundam, really whatever, all while being given notes along the way telling little stories from a Zachtronics perspective. In the end, Zachtronics closed its doors to send its team on their own creative endeavors, as the whole Zach-like era was kind of solved and done with. Thankfully, no controversies, just a team that felt they perfected a formula and were ready for new challenges to come. You may be thinking, gosh, this Zach guy is smart, he should teach.
Oh my god!
At first, the Zach of Zachtronics did intend to go full-on education mode, taking up a job teaching computer science to high school students. But it turns out for whatever reason, he wasn't really a fan of that route after all, and has since decided that gaming is his future. So really, the Zach story isn't over at all, and for all we know, a masterpiece could be coming before we know it. Or not, but the good news is, the tale of Zach Barth is one that's still being written.
Part 3. Zachnalysis.
Zachtronics is a studio that puts out games with remarkable polish and heart, and their games aren't really like anything I've encountered prior. They almost remind me of the big box era of PC games in the 90s. But they seem to have earned their relative success pretty much in spite of the market. Let's dig into that. Gaming these days is very, well, gamified. At the most extreme end of the spectrum, you've got titles like Genshin Impact or AFK Arena, which are basically glorified slot machines. Outside of the anime girl slots, the core gameplay is grinding mobs, then watching numbers go up in your experience bar so you can go fight mobs with bigger numbers, but you're not necessarily improving on anything in any way. It's very brain-turned-off action. Now, there's honestly nothing wrong with that. I've been playing Fire Emblem Three Hopes, an extension of the story of Fire Emblem Three Houses. Three Hopes thankfully doesn't have any gacha mechanics, but it really is just an X-mashing simulator mixed with a dating sim. Though that's a bit degenerate, I like this game because of the story, world, and characters, which I do think can stir some thoughts while providing a good recreational experience. So there's nothing wrong with playing games that let you kind of turn off your brain and just have fun. Just please don't empty your bank accounts to play gacha. Humans kind of have a hard time with addiction and the timing of their gratification, so it's important to not let games just become gambling for babies, which unfortunately has become the fate of many arcades in America, along with practically the entire mobile gaming department, which is just microtransaction pay-to-play land. But that's a story for another time. Zachtronics sits on the other end of the spectrum, making games that are incredibly brain-turned-on, with the fun levels being, arguable at times. These aren't games where you mindlessly mash A, but they're also not games that require intense precision and mechanical skill with your hands. They're simply challenging cerebral experiences, and that's a hard sell. It's not that these games are like intellectually superior to the masses or whatever, they're just kind of hard to get into. I think a good example of this is Baba Is You, a successful indie puzzle game which scales up to be quite difficult. From the outset, Baba Is You has this quirky name, looks kind of like Undertale, and kind of sounds like Among Us. It's a cute, casual, friendly looking game, which is a great start to a recipe for success. Now, the game leads you into a false sense of security, as it turns out to become pretty hard like I said. Only around 2% of people complete the game, which is about the same as an average Zachtronics game. But the audience that Baba Is You brings in has got a bit more casuals like me in the mix, and that's because the game starts very clearly. You've got these text blocks you can move around and immediately see the effect of, so the average person can at least get through the first third of the game without too much issue. So right from the start, Baba Is You is much more appealing and seemingly accessible than SpaceChem with its kind of messy tutorial, or TIS 100 and Shenzhen IO, which require actual manuals that Zach recommends we print out and keep on a binder on our desks. Don't get me wrong, I really like the charm of the manuals, but it's probably going to scare a casual player away. Despite this appeal issue, there is something magical about Zachtronics games. Many other puzzle games like Baba Is You, Portal, or Talos Principle often involve you moving your character through space in such a way that they make it to the end of the level. In a Zach-like game, a solution to a puzzle is a physical widget. You can view your whole solution before your eyes, which encourages the player to improve their solution. You can even use the brilliant GIF exporter featured in many Zach-likes, which further encourages producing those seamless, beautiful solutions. What do you want to optimize? Maybe you want to make it as fast as possible, or as cheap as possible, or maybe as small as possible, or maybe you like making Rube Goldberg machines that go through great lengths to achieve a simple task. When you're done with a level, the games often show you a histogram comparing your solution to other players. Titles like Opus Magnum even give you several different histograms between costs, cycles, and area, giving you the outlet to optimize the facet that you care about the most. Okay, I'm doing pretty good here, looking pretty optimal. How? Zachtronics is a studio that encourages the player creating the challenges on top of an already challenging experience. Minecraft lets the player create whatever meaning and purpose they want, but in a Zachtronics game, to advance you must solve the problem in front of you first. Most games pad your ego by increasing your numbers and making you feel like the best, even if that means adding bots to competitive experiences. Even in a game like Factorio, you at least get to keep what you just built. Zach says, hey, solve this problem, and when you give him an answer, he hands you back 3 more problems and a report card comparing you to the rest of the class. That's not super rewarding to the lizard brain within us, but I hope we can see that there's something of value here. Zachtronics games have you learning just about the entire game through. Most games front load all the concepts you need to know, then you spend the rest of your time implementing and honing those ideas. Dark Souls is far from an easy game and probably not the most accessible game of all time, but once you've spent the first couple of hours learning how to play Dark Souls, you spend most of the rest of the game honing these mechanics. You might have to learn an attack pattern, but you're mostly just dodging, parrying, and then hitting the enemies. As the best YouTuber Donkey has said,
once you understand that it's dodge and hit, then you realize that the game ain't shit. Pack.
But in a Zachtronics game, the whole game is the learning aspect. You're never physically implementing any mechanic, it's like you're playing an infinite tutorial. So that begs the question, who are these games for? Let's use TIS 100 as an example. Most people who are interested in assembly-themed challenges either already know assembly or are already in some field of the coding world. And those who aren't in that field would rarely be interested in a game like this. So it's a small population made even smaller when you ponder on who wants to take their time off work from their coding jobs to take on more coding tasks. In the traditional gaming market, the main audience for TIS 100 are people who are interested in working out their coding strength in a recreational setting. Those people do exist, of course, but it's not a big pool to pull from. Now, don't get me wrong, lots of people out there can succeed at these games given some effort, and I highly encourage anyone to play them even if they do feel a bit intimidated. I'm just not sure how many people want to be challenged like this in their free time. As stated, Zachtronics exists in spite of the traditional market pressures. I see this as basically the same as the gamification spectrum. If on one end of the spectrum you've got games that are slaves to the market to the point of pretty much not being a game anymore like AFK Arena, on the other end you've got Zachtronics games, along with some other quality gems, but unfortunately due to their lack of marketability, sit amongst an ocean of garbage games that are unmarketable for a reason. A lot of gaming media likes to focus on the monetization of games as a corrupting negative source on the medium, and it's easy to see why with the hellscape that is mobile games. But what does it look like when games completely ignore what any reasonable person with an MBA would say? A lot of them, the ones that aren't sketchy garbage, look like Zachtronics games. Zachtronics-like games are great titles that are not only not for a wide audience, but also shouldn't be forced to be that broadly appealing either. Gaming these days is a medium that has as much depth and complexity as you want to explore, and that's amazing. With a massive catalog of casual but well-made, widely appealing games, it's easier than ever to get people into the world of video games. But the rewarding experience of finding and playing something obscure and or challenging is just as present as ever too. It's the best of both worlds. But there's still sort of a problem. At least for me, it's not just enough that the Zach-likes are allowed to exist and have a chance of being played. These games seem to have a higher purpose than just being a neat Steam find. It feels like someone at the Department of Education should have noticed Zachtronics. They're basically making world-class education software. While Zachtronics games fare okay on the game marketplace of Steam, I wonder if the real home for these sorts of games should be in computer classrooms. Shenzhen IO might not be very easy to get into for a Steam game, but as an introduction to microcontrollers and assembly language, it's very easy to get into. And as someone who's worked under a grant for the Department of Education, I'm pretty confident in saying that this is a more worthy project than a lot of other initiatives. It seems as though there are private companies with interest in Zachtronics particularly, like the company involved with those secret Zachtronics apps I mentioned earlier, but I think this is something that needs to be pushed on a wider scale. In a world with Minecraft AP tests, I don't see why we can't have a couple of Zach-likes in the classroom too. So Zachtronics is fine where they are now, but maybe there's a greater purpose that could be explored further.
Final thoughts.
From the beginnings with Infinitron, a game where the players came up with everything, through to Last Call BBS, Zachtronics games have never strived to be video games in the standard sense. In Last Call BBS, once you finish building the Gundam model, a message appears that reads as follows. You might wonder why I included this program since it's not really a game in the strict sense of the word. It's more like a toy or some kind of weird simulator without any particular goal. I guess the reason is, I was just so impressed by the lengths this guy went to making all of this art and everything, and releasing it all for free just because he wanted to build some model kits with his kid. I think that's such a great expression of the creativity of that early computer era. There weren't nearly as many rules or commercial pressures. You could just make a fun toy, and that was the whole point. In the end, I don't think we need to convert all of gaming to be Zach-like experiences. It's necessary we have games that allow us to unwind and not think for a bit. But as necessary as those titles are, I also wish that we had more studios like Zachtronics in gaming, making polished experiences that expect a lot from their audience. So yeah, please let me know what y'all thought about this video in the comments below and what other games you think sit near the Zach sphere. Like and subscribe maybe too. Okay, thank you, bye bye!
Here's to the ones that we got. Cheers to the wish you were here but you're not, 'cause the drinks bring back all the memories of everything we've been through.